So thank you so much. I'm Paige. I'm an alcoholic. And where we're going to be picking up today is on page XXX, XXX. And again, when we have to go to this page, I always think of that movie with Vin Diesel, where he was jumping out a helicopter on a snowboard. I didn't watch the movie, but that hopefully will give you enough time to find the page. XXX, XXX, in the doctor's opinion. And where we're picking up is the second full paragraph. And so where we're starting is right where it says, the classification of alcoholics seems most difficult and in much detail is outside of the scope of this book. So where we're at is the second statement that is from Dr. William D. Silkworth. And what he's saying is he's like, oh, classifying alcoholics, that's a little tricky. And trying to do that is outside of what we need to do in this book. And then he goes and does it anyways, which I just love, So this is type 1. So let's go through these types. Let's break them down. Let's see if we relate. And I think if we explain them in a little bit of detail, we will find ourselves relating to more of them than we think we do, at least when we first start reading it on our own. So this is type 1. So if you're writing, you can make a little note right beside there are, because that is 1. There are, of course, the psychopaths who are emotionally unstable. We are all familiar with this type. They are always going on the wagon for keeps. They are over-remorseful and make many resolutions, but never a decision. So type 1 is the psychopath. And here's the thing, when we hear psychopath, who here, we don't have to do a show of hands, but who here stays up all night listening to true crime podcasts or watching true crime documentaries and then is wondering why they don't feel well rested? Yeah, you guys know. And so when we think of psychopath, we think of somebody in the middle of that true crime sort of type person, like a serial killer type thing. And so I read psychopath and I'm like, well, that's not even remotely me. I tell this story about the time I saved an ant from the toilet. I don't kill mosquitoes. That's the person I am. I'm not a psychopath. But let us take that label and put it on the shelf. We're going to readdress that label in a bit, but let's just put it right there on this. I don't know. The hand talking's bad today, guys. We have a shelf. It's there. Boom. Put it right there. All right. So, leaving aside psychopath, can I relate to being the type of alcoholic that is emotionally unstable? That I haven't found that emotional solid ground? That I'm always going on the wagon for keeps. I'm always swearing off. I'm never going to do it again. I'm never going to do it again. And I make many resolutions, which is to say a promise that I will never drink again, but never a decision, which is to say I have a hard time following up that resolution with action. Does that sound familiar? And one of the things that is important to understand that for an alcoholic, those firm resolutions, my desire, my wish, my want, I'm never going to drink again, my desire to stay sober has absolutely no effect on my ability to stay sober if I'm an alcoholic. Can I relate to saying I'm never going to do it again, and only to find myself doing it again and again and again? And if you're wondering what is the thing that makes it so I do it again and again and again, that I go back to it again and again and again, that is the obsession of the mind. It is the obsession of the mind that takes me back again and again to that first drink. So can I relate to saying I'm gonna quit tomorrow and find myself drunk? Can I relate to, I promise I'm going to go to detox, but then getting cold feet and not making my way there? Can I relate to saying I'm never going to do it again, only to find myself doing it again? Now, I told you, psychopath. So let's grab that off the shelf. Again, I don't know why I'm full on miming, take it off the shelf. Psychopath. You see, I'm not a psychopath. Surely I'm not just, saving the ant story, not just the killing mosquitoes, but I don't know about you. I was somebody, man, I never, and I mean never, wanted to hurt people in the way that I was hurting people. I could see that my actions were hurting them and I did not want to do it. But that is the power of this illness, alcoholism, that I would do it anyways. So some of you guys know that I'm fun at parties. Woo! And so what that means is I have a dictionary, and not just one dictionary, but two dictionaries. So I've got a dictionary from the 1930s, again, woohoo, fun at parties, but I also have a medical dictionary from the 1930s. And if you're wondering, did I specifically go out and buy those things? No, I already had them, because I'm fun. So what I did was I looked up the word psychopath. And in my dictionary, it spoke about, it says psychopathy is a mental disease. So psychopathy is somebody who is mentally ill. That's the language has changed since the 1930s. And then in my dictionary, it says a psychopath is a person affected by yeah, that's kind of you. Psychoneurosis. And it's like, oh, psychoneurosis? Do I got a bad case of that? What is that? So I have to look it up, right? What is psychoneurosis? Psychoneurosis is a functional disorder of the mind or nerves. What it's just saying is the type of person who appears to be mentally ill. And the fact that I am swearing off I'm never going to drink again, and I find myself drinking again, that's what that means. So psychopath, we're not talking about a Norman Bates or I can't remember what's that Christian Bale one where he does the workouts and he's really obsessed with business cards, that guy. I can't remember that movie. Some of you guys know what I'm talking about. Yeah, that one. That's not what we're talking about. And if I look at all the consequences the physical allergy has caused me, which is to say the consequences that have resulted as the result of my inability to control the amount that I drink once I start, it would be insane for me to go back to it. But again, that is the power of the mental obsession. So that's type 1. Now we got type 2. Type 2. There is the man who is unwilling to admit he cannot take a drink. He plans various ways of drinking. He changes his brand or his environment. So type 2. Type 2, he's our guy. He doesn't think he's got the allergy. And so he's doing everything he can to not have to give up his drinking. Have I ever switched what I was drinking? Have I ever switched from scotch to brandy, which I'm like, that is some fancy sort of drinking. Did I ever switch from hard liquor to beer? Did I ever switch to wine? Did I ever switch from, I'll tell you, I was never a top shelf sort of gal. I'm a bottom shelf sort of gal. But did I switch what was going on around the bottom shelf, you know? Did I switch my drinks? And hey, was there a time where maybe I substituted in with some non-conference approved dry goods here and there? Drugs. Did I ever do that? You know, did I switch it around? And so that's what we're talking about. Can I relate to this denial of the allergy? And also, I want to point something out. Why would I be in denial of the allergy? Why would I be in denial of the fact that, man, it seems like I can't drink? It's because I have, what alcohol gives me is something that alcohol does not give a non-alcoholic. Alcohol gives me a sense of ease and comfort. It gives me that relief and that release. It is the answer to all my problems. So of course I wouldn't want to give it up. And I try to do everything I can to hold on to my ability to drink. Now this is type 3. There is the type who always believes that after being entirely free from alcohol for a period of time, he can take a drink without danger. So have I ever been that person? Listen, I've been sober for 3 years, 3 months, 3 days, 3 hours. It'll be different this time, right? Can I relate? Or am I sitting in the rooms and I'm thinking, you know, I could do this for 1 year and then I could probably drink safely. Or, you know, for me, when I was new, I'm like 5 years, that feels like enough. You know, do I relate to that idea? No, someday, somehow, if I'm just sober long enough, I will be able to control and enjoy my drinking. Can I relate to that? Have I been that person? And then it says, type 4. There is the manic depressive type, who is perhaps the least understood by his friends and about whom a whole chapter could be written. Now, in 2025 manic depressive would sort of be referencing people who have bipolar disorder. Now, if you have a diagnosis of bipolar disorder and this part of the book resonates with you, wonderful. Have it resonate. In fact, one of my best friends for years and years and years, I remember I was doing a big book study, my friend was there, and my friend is schizoaffective, which is schizophrenia and bipolar. And I remember we were talking about this part of the book, and my friend was like, "Oh man, I wish they had written a whole chapter about the manic depressive type." And I was like, "Homie, you got a whole book. You got a whole book. You don't need an extra special chapter." And so there, for a number of years too, I would reference that idea of like, "Hey, do I feel emotionally all over the place? You know, where I, sober or drunk, I feel like I don't have emotional solid ground and I'm going from extreme highs to extreme lows. Do I relate to that?" But then, 1930s dictionary, 1930s medical dictionary, let's see what the 1930s had to say about manic depressive type. So I wasn't able to find the definition manic depressive, but I was able to find mania. So in my dictionary, it said mania, which is a violent insanity, an intense excitement. And this what might resonate with us the most strongly. Mania, an excessive or unreasonable desire. When I look at my relationship with alcohol, is it safe to say I might have an excessive or unreasonable desire for that first drink or that next drink? Does that sound like me? Now, and I often talk a lot, all my alcoholism wants is one more drink. That's all it wants. That's all it wants. It doesn't matter whether I'm 3 weeks into a bender or I'm 30 years sober. All my illness wants is one more drink. And it doesn't seem like too high a cost, but it costs me everything. One more drink, that's all it wants. So I then looked up mania in my medical dictionary, because again, fun at parties. And mania is a wild, violent insanity, a wild excitement. But then it had some of you guys are like, "I'm so bored with your dictionary stuff," but it had a sub definition. Ooh, and it said mania alcoholic. And I'm like, "Oh girl, what is this mania alcoholic we're talking about?" Because it's feeling familiar. It says insanity from misuse of alcohol. And then there was another sub definition. Some of you, woo, I could tell who's like, "Oh, let me get those dictionary definitions down." This is why we need Rob. He'd be putting it in the chat because he's the best. Another sub definition was mania a potu. So mania and then an A, and I think what it had was an umlaut. I feel like that's what it's called, an umlaut. Don't quote me on the umlaut, but the like dot or the dash. And then potu, P-O-T-U. And that was delirium tremens. And so we can take that all-inclusive definition of, do I relate to maybe having clinical bipolar disorder? Do I relate to having emotions that are all over the place? Do I relate to the excessive desire for alcohol? And do I relate to having at sometimes delirium tremens? Can I relate to any of that? And then, if you're like, "Absolutely not, 1 to 4, never been her, never met her, I don't know her," well, don't you worry, we got type 5. Because if you're here today and you just want to Hurkle-durkle it, I don't got to do this thing, I'm not in the 4 types, well, we got you with type 5. We got to hustle or bustle, not Hurkle-durkle. Type 5, and it says, then, there are types entirely normal in every respect, except in the effect that alcohol has upon them. They are often able, intelligent, friendly people. Oh, how did you know? Oh, that's me. I'm just kidding. Listen, I'm 1 through 4. I've never been 5. You know what I'm saying? Oh, able, intelligent, friendly. Can't relate, but that is for all of us that don't relate to the first 4. And I wonder, I'm just throwing it out there, I wonder if type 5 is really meant for those who are stuck in a bit of denial. where it's like, nope, I'm not like that. No, I'm not like that. I'm entirely normal. Well, what about the types that are entirely normal? And when we talk about in every respect, we're normal, except in the effect alcohol has upon them. The effect that alcohol has upon us is the physical allergy. And that physical allergy is what happens once I start to drink. I get that phenomenon of craving, and it tells me more. And the more that I drink, the louder that more gets. Now, we're going to talk about that here in a bit. So, and breaking that down, I love doing that, the 5 types. Now, I will say the 4 types that are referenced in the chapter 2 Wives are actually a lot stronger for finding whether or not we relate. We often have to break down these 5 types to see where we relate. And my hope is if you're here today, you're relating to almost all of them, because most of us have been at least some of those in our drinking careers. So, and here's why, and I love it, because it's bookended by Dr. Silkworth saying, oh, classifying alcoholics, that's so difficult and it's outside the scope of the book. And then the other bookend is, here's why classifying it doesn't matter. Here's why we didn't even need to do any of that. It says, all these and many others have one symptom in common. So this one symptom permeates everyone who has this illness. And this is the symptom. They cannot start drinking without developing the phenomenon of craving. So the one symptom that binds us all together is the physical allergy. It says this phenomenon, and now we're talking about the physical allergy, but as we continue to go on, we're going to bring back the obsession of the mind, because it's important that I see that I have the allergy, because the allergy tells me that I can't drink again, but the obsession of the mind tells me I will drink again. And when I understand that, I understand step 1. So they cannot start drinking without developing the phenomenon of craving. This phenomenon, as we have suggested, now a phenomenon is something that we don't quite know and understand and explain. And so in the 1930s, they hadn't chopped open brains and saw the tetrahydroisoquinoline. They hadn't spent some time checking out liver enzymes. They didn't know some of the scientific stuff that has later been probably proven and then disproven, then new things proven. They didn't understand that, but they could observe what happened to us. And so this phenomenon, this thing that once I start to drink, I can't control the amount that I take, may be the manifestation of an allergy. Now again, an allergy, even in my 1930s dictionary, medical dictionary, I got it right here. It is a natural hypersensitivity to an artificially induced substance. So I have a response that is abnormal. And it's a response. So something is induced, in my case, alcohol. And my response is that I'm sensitive to it. Now, I've learned I probably have hay fever because I get a little itchy in the spring, a little sneezies. So when I get the hay fever, I'm sensitive to whatever the pollen is. And I get a little nose runny and I get a little sinusy and I get a little itchy eyes. And so I'm sensitive to that. But the effect that I'm sensitive towards when it comes to alcohol is this. You know what I mean? Whew. I take a drink and I get that answer. But then a switch flips in the back of my head and it tells me more. And the more that I drink, so the more of the substance that is introduced, the stronger the allergic reaction. So the louder that more gets. So I start to drink and I need more. And the more that I drink, the more that I need to drink. And I want you to know that non-alcoholics never, full stop, never experience that. They might drink, they might get drunk, but they don't know what it's like to have that next drink pulling them to their next, to their next, to their next. They don't know what it's like to start and not know where they're going to end up and when they're going to stop. I remember I was over a year sober. I was in university, and I remember this because it was wild to me. And somebody was talking about their drinking, and they said, I'm really afraid. I blacked out last night. Some of you got why that's weird. That doesn't happen every time or almost every time, like wild. They're like, what a strange phenomena that happened. And I'm like, what a regular Tuesday, So their response is different. And so do I relate to that? Where once I start, I can't stop. And once I start, I have something in me that tells me more and more. And the more that I drink, the more I need that next drink. And it says the manifestation of an allergy which differentiates these people and sets them apart as a distinct entity on a physiological level. How my body processes alcohol is just different to non-alcoholics. That's it. It has never been by any treatment with which we are familiar permanently eradicated. So in the 1930s, I think this statement was probably came from 1938 or 37. If Rob was here, he would correct me. But he's not, so it's all loosey-all-goosey over here. So this statement probably came 38, maybe 37. And they didn't have a solution for the allergy. We don't have a way to get rid of the allergy. If I got the allergy, I got the allergy. Well, it's 2025, 90 plus years later, and we still do not have a solution for the allergy. I guess it's a little under 90 because 90 was 35. Somebody's not doing her math. But that idea that we still don't have a way to get rid of the allergy. And we've tried things. There's been medications, even things like antabuse. And did you know, I never have been on antabuse. Did you know you can just drink right through that? Or, which sounds like a nightmare because it's drink and puke and drink and puke. Or you just, here's the thing, stop taking it and then you drink. I know, wild that an alcoholic would do that. Wild, right? So we don't have a solution for alcoholism. And I've even seen people who are given medication to help and they drink on it. And we don't have a solution for the allergy. So it says the only relief we have to suggest is entire abstinence. So if I have any experiences of the allergy in my life, what do I need? I need complete abstinence. There will never be a time in my life where I'm able to drink like a lady. I have demonstrated that that's out of reach for somebody like me. So I need entire abstinence. I need to never drink again. And by the time many of us come to Alcoholics Anonymous, we've already seen that and we've already conceded that. But if you're here today, you know that that is not something that an alcoholic can do. I can't stay away from the first drink on my own power. It goes on to say this immediately precipitates us. The us is the medical community, the doctors, into a seething cauldron of debate. Much has been written pro and con, but among physicians, among the best doctors of their time and even still today, the general opinion seems to be that most chronic alcoholics are doomed. To say doomed is, so let's underline or highlight or whatever you want to do, doomed, and we can make a note that that is another word for hopeless. Because as we go through this book, we want to see hopeless, hopeless, hopeless. And I was realizing today, as helping somebody with a step 1, 2, 3, I don't think I emphasize this enough. In Alcoholics Anonymous, we talk about powerlessness. We talk about unmanageability. And I natter on because I natter about hopelessness. But what does it mean to be powerless? What does it mean to be unmanageable? And what does it mean to be hopeless? What that means is I will drink again. That's what that means. You can make a note of that if that would be helpful for you. Because that is a step 1 idea, that I will drink again. For an alcoholic, I drink, I have the allergy. So many of us, to drink is to die. But to understand that my step 1 is not I can't ever drink again. My step 1 is I will drink again. That is my step 1. And so that is the hopelessness. And you'll notice as we go through hopeless, it is always juxtaposed with hope. So we have hopelessness and we have hope. And the hope at the top of XXI is this. What is the solution? And in Alcoholics Anonymous, we have a solution. We have an answer and we have a way out. And Dr. Silkworth, he's going to explain it through example. So what is the solution? That's our hope, that we have a solution. He says, perhaps I can best answer this by relating about one of my experiences. And so that's how we learn, and this book goes through the pattern of like information, story. We relate to these stories. And our hope is that we're going to relate to this first guy. So our first guy, his name is Hank Parkhurst. And actually what I'm going to do is I am going to, hold on, boom, boom, because normally Rob would put him in the chat, but we're not able to do that. So it's me and Hank. It's my hanky pants, my hanky poo. I don't think he would like me calling him that. I don't think we would be friends. I mean, I want to be friends with him, but I don't think he'd like me. So Hank Parkhurst. And his story was in the first edition of the book, and it was called The Unbelievers. Now, Hank Parkhurst also wrote the chapter to employers. It's the only chapter in the book, other than the stories, that was not written by Bill, but I guess it really was heavily edited by Bill. I'm not one to diagnose, but all I'm saying is Hank had a writing style that mirrors my thought process, which is to say, some deficit in attention. He was all over the place. So I think Bill had to shore it up for him. And honestly, we don't talk a lot about Hank Parkhurst, but we would not have this book if it wasn't for him. It was a lot of his work and his effort, and it was really him pushing and driving us to have this book. And we wouldn't have had it without him. And sometimes you'll hear people say, "Oh, Bill Wilson, he was the salesman. He's a consummate salesman. He's whining and dining." He wasn't whining and dining because he was sober, but he was wheeling and dealing. That he might have done. But that wasn't Bill. Bill wasn't a salesman by education or by trade. He was educated as a lawyer. He worked as a stock speculator. Hank was a salesman. That was Hank's job. And so let's talk about this guy, Hank, and we're going to see a pattern. So it says, about 1 year prior to this experience, a man, Hank Parkhurst, was brought in to be treated for chronic alcoholism. So he's brought into the town's hospital. Dr. Silkworth is treating him. He had but partially recovered from a gastric hemorrhage. And what that means is that Hank Parkhurst had had internal bleeding as the result of his drinking. He had gone to the hospital. He had gotten treatment for it. And then he drank again, and it continued to bleed. Does that sound familiar? Have any of us ever had a warning from the doctor, ended up in the emergency room, the ER or the A&E, and then got a strong warning and then drank again? Does that sound familiar? And it says, and seemed to be a case of pathological mental deterioration. Our boy Hank, man, it seemed like he was absolutely losing his mind. And I remember, this wasn't my experience, but I remember I was on the train with my boyfriend, who also an alcoholic, and the only thing that he had consumed was alcohol, and he was having visual hallucinations, and he was actually arguing with people that weren't there on the train, and it was the result of solely his drinking. He didn't have any other diagnoses. Now, you don't have to relate to that and that level of it, but do I feel that sense of I'm losing my mind? He had lost everything worthwhile in life and was only living, one might say, to drink. So that was his only joy, his only peace, his only comfort in life. Everything else had been eroded away or stripped away from him as the result of his alcoholism. He frankly admitted and believed for him there was no hope. So I want to emphasize this, either highlight or underline or make a note, that he came to that place of hopelessness. Because that is where we all need to get to, that place where I see the reality of my predicament if I am an alcoholic, which is to say I am hopeless. Another way to say it, and I like to describe it this way, you guys don't need to, but I like to, that's a step one experience. Coming to that place of hopelessness. He sees that there's not a way out for him. There's no option. And we're going to see that this is a pattern. So I come to a place of hopelessness. And then here's what happens. It says, following the elimination of alcohol, so he's medically detoxed. So hopelessness, and then in his case, he's detoxed. Sometimes we can be detoxed, then hopeless. Doesn't matter the order. And it says there was found to be no permanent brain injury. So he's like, hey, he didn't have Actually, there's a condition, it's called Korsakoff, Wernicke's encephalopathy, and that's where you drink yourself into permanent brain damage. And it looks like it's horrific. And so what they're saying is like, okay, he had done damage, but no permanent brain injury, he's okay. And it says he accepted the plan outlined in this book. So when he accepted the plan outlined in this book, what that means is he took the actions of the 12 steps. So from hopeless to he took the steps. Let's emphasize that. Now, what happens here is the result of the 12 steps. This is what I like to describe a spiritual, some of you guys know I like my sneaky prayers, I like my sneaky promises, and I like my sneaky descriptions of a spiritual awakening. And we're going to see the sneaky description of a spiritual awakening. And this is what follows. So it says 1 year later. Now I'm going to emphasize, it did not take Hank Parkhurst a year to work the steps. It ought not take a full year to work the steps. The steps are meant to be taken quickly and thoroughly. Those two things have to work together. It's a lot of work, but it does not take long. And that is the longest sort of time that's ever mentioned. And it did not take him that long to actually do the course of the steps. It was like a year later is when he saw Hank again. That's more what it's referencing. 1 year later, he called to see me. And I experienced a very strange sensation. So this is, again, Dr. Silkworth reporting. He says, I knew the man by name and partially recognized his features. But there all resemblance ended. So he's saying, like, I can see that guy, I don't know if it's this way or this way, this way or this way. I can see that guy's Hank. But he's not the same man. Like, even his face looks different. But there all resemblance ended. From a trembling, despairing, nervous wreck had emerged a man brimming over with self-reliance and contentment. So the Hank Parkhurst that he had met when he first treated him and took him through the detoxification process was not the same man that stood before him. And I want to point out, this is what it looks like to Dr. Silkworth. So he's standing there and he's looking at this guy, Hank, and he's saying, man, I can't even recognize this guy. Like, I can tell it's Hank, you know, he's got the Hank nose or the Hank lips, but like, man, he's completely different. And what it looks like to him was somebody who was transformed from a despairing, trembling, nervous wreck. And he is now a man that is brimming over, which is to say, it's almost like overflowing with self-reliance and contentment. Now, again, I want to emphasize, it looks like self-reliance to Dr. Silkworth, because that's what he sees. He sees somebody that appears to be confident and self-assured, and he's got his stuff together. I was going to say poop in a group, but didn't want to say that, but did anyways. Woohoo! And that's what it looks like. But I can assure you, to have this experience, it is not that I am self-reliant. Instead, it is that I am God-reliant or higher power reliant. But that's what it looks like. And I also want to point something out. If that is what it looks like on the outside, we can imagine what it looks like on the inside. Last week, as we were doing a deep dive into this cycle, because it's so important, we were speaking about the restless, irritable discontent. And I always like to make a joke that's the doctor. The patient appears to be a little bit, perhaps, restless, irritable, and discontent today. And what does it actually feel like from the inside out? From the inside out, it's like my skin doesn't fit. There's a screaming from the depth of my soul. Depression's so bad I can't get out of bed. You know, when you can see that I'm a trembling, despairing, nervous wreck, imagine what it is like on the inside. And so the metaphor that I'm going to use is like, man, when I am living my life my way, in my alcoholism, and my alcoholism is untreated, I am living with an internal, like, brutalist architecture. But what happens is I take a course of action, and my internal world turns into that Baroque style. You know, it changes. and it's different, and it's light, and it's beautiful. My internal climate. And I want you to know, if you're here today and you're feeling that inside, I'm making an architecture metaphor. If you're feeling that brutalist architecture, if you feel like your insides are gray and harsh and unforgiving, and you just don't know if you can do it anymore, even if you've been sober a while, what I want you to know is that Baroque style, that light, that joy, that ornamentation on the inside is available to us, even if you've been sober a while. And it does not take long to get well. It does not take long to work the steps. It does not take long to have a spiritual awakening. He says, I talked with him for some time, but was not able to bring myself to feel that I had known him before. The change happens from the inside out. He wasn't changing his external circumstances. He didn't get a haircut. He changed who he was on the inside. Or actually, what I should say is he took a course of action, and who he was from the inside out was transformed. It says, to me, he was a stranger, and so he left me. A long time has passed with no return to alcohol. So what does the spiritual awakening look like? It looks like this transformation of who we are and sobriety. I always want to point out permanent, contented sobriety, but the permanency and the contentment is contingent on me continuing to do this work. If I stop doing this work, I won't live in that permanent sobriety, and I won't live in that contented sobriety. And that contentment is going to go before my sobriety does. All right, so who's our next guy? It says, when I need a mental uplift. So when Dr. Silkworth's having a bad day, he says, I often think of another case brought in by a physician prominent in New York. And this is, oopsies. Oh, I got to go this way. This is our boy. Now, I love Fitz. This is Fitz Mayo, Fitzmayo. Fitz Mayo. He's my boy. I love him. And part of why I love him, we'll talk about it, is I've had experiences like him. These Fitz Mayo experiences, and we're going to read, but Fitz Mayo, man, he was the first person where I saw my story in this book. And if you want to read more about Fitz Mayo, and depending on how I'm doing for time, we might even pop over there. But his story is in the 4th edition, and his story is Our Southern Friend. So Our Southern Friend, so if you want to read more. Fitz Mayo, Our Southern Friend. So when he needs a mental uplift, he often thinks of another case brought in by a physician prominent in New York. The patient had made his own diagnosis, and the diagnosis is this, and deciding his situation hopeless. So just like Hank, he had, again, I call it a step 1 experience because that's where I got to get to in step 1. He had this experience of hopelessness. So I start from hopelessness. So that's where we start. We're going to see this pattern. He had hidden in a deserted barn, determined to die. And the reason I love Fitz Mayo so much is I did something very similar. And for me, I'll tell you a bit about the story. Is I was living on the streets. I was homeless, and I don't talk too much about that because if you're like me, you're looking for any way you're not like me. You're like, I wasn't homeless. Great, that's cool. That doesn't make me an alcoholic. It makes me a terrible roommate. It's obsession of the mind and allergy of the body. But where I ended up was I was living on the streets, and one night I spent the entire night. I walked all the way from the drop-in center, which is a homeless shelter in downtown Calgary, all the way to the airport, which is on the outskirts of the city. And I walked that whole night. I used to play rugby, and I was right by the rugby field I used to play, and it was not right behind a dumpster. Some of y'all know my affinities for dumpsters. I was afraid I was going to get crushed, but it was dumpster adjacent, and I was sleeping there, and what had happened is my body just gave up. And I slept so I got there, I slept all day, I slept all night, I didn't have any food or water, my body just gave up. I slept all day, I slept all night. I slept all day and I slept all night, and it was on the 3rd night, I guess, where the temperature, it was like October, November, I can't do it in Fahrenheit, y'all. You're getting Celsius, whether you like it or not. We were hovering around 0 degrees, maybe 5, maybe -5, but no, I don't think it was -5. But then we got our classic Calgary weather where it switched. And we went on that 3rd night down to below 30 degrees Celsius with the wind chill. and it was so cold. And I remember like I had to take off my shoes and hold my feet in my hands to keep them from freezing. And when he described hiding in a deserted bar determined to die, I'm like, man, I have been there. And it's like, I love that when we find ourselves in this book and we find this book in our lives, man, that allows us to continue to have deeper and deeper experiences. And from that, me seeing Fitz in this book and Fitz's experience in my life, was I able to have what I like to talk about is another type of Fitz Mayo experience. And Fitz Mayo had a powerful spiritual awakening, and I had one just like him. You see, I can't stay well on one experience. So if you're like, I've not had a Fitz Mayo experience, well, keep coming, let's do it. Don't hide in a deserted barn. And then it says he was rescued by a searching party, which I'm a little like, hey, I didn't get a searching party. I'm just kidding. He was rescued by a searching party and in desperate condition brought to me. Following his physical rehabilitation, so he was also physically detoxed, he had a talk with me in which he frankly stated he thought treatment a waste of effort, unless I could assure him, which no one ever had, that in the future he would have, and I'm going to put this in quotes, the willpower to resist the impulse to drink. And it's I didn't just put it in quotes, it's in quotes. It's because as an alcoholic, my willpower has absolutely no effect on my ability to stay sober. Where I can align my willpower is working the actions of the 12 steps, and that takes a lot of willpower. But willpower by itself cannot and will not keep an alcoholic sober. So Fitz Mayo has his step 1 experience. We might not call it that, but he's hopeless. And he's like, there's no point to any of this. And this bottom paragraph, it says his alcoholic problem was so complex. His depression was so great. So if you're here today and you're feeling like, Paige, you don't understand what I've got going on in my life, my depression, the problems in my life, it's so complicated, and my depression's so great, and I've got so many problems. Well, so did Fitz. And it said we felt his only hope would be what we then called moral psychology. And the moral psychology is the 12 steps to produce a spiritual awakening. They're like, that's the only thing we could offer this guy, because nothing else is going to work on him. And it says, and we doubted if even that would have any effect. They didn't even know or think it could possibly help Fitz, but we might as well give it to him anyway. However, he did become sold on the ideas contained in this book. What that means, so that's another important line. He worked the 12 steps. He took the actions that later became our 12 steps. And this is the result. So I gotta get hopeless, I gotta take the actions, and then I get the results. The results come after the steps. Now, these are the results. And again, this is another sneaky definition of a spiritual awakening, a spiritual experience. It says that he has not had a drink for a great many years. So permanent sobriety. I see him now and then, and he is as fine a specimen of manhood as one could wish to meet. That who Fitz Mayo was as a human being was such a fine example of humanity. You just want to hang out with this guy. Who doesn't love Fitz Mayo? He's the best. But that change in who we are to be the best versions of ourselves, and permanent, again in asterisks, all of this is contingent on me continuing to do this work on a daily basis. And that is another sneaky description of a spiritual awakening. And then it goes on to say, I earnestly advise every alcoholic to read this book through. So he's saying, read this book, and that's what we're doing. And though perhaps he came to scoff, which is to be like, no, God, a spiritual awakening, inventory, it's saying even if we come to scoff, he's hoping we remain to pray. And I love that, because you can see throughout the doctor's opinion, he's sort of ducking around the higher power thing. He's like, I don't want to say spirituality, but he sneaks it in at the end. So it's like, we hope that every alcoholic will read this book. And even if you're doubtful, we hope you're going to stick around long enough to pray. And then it says William D. Silkworth, MD. Now, in the first edition, it did not have his name in it, and it was like XXMD. And that was added posthumously, so it was added after his death. And that's part of why the doctor's opinion is not on page 1. is because whenever you have anyone that contributes to the numbered pages of a book, you're considered an author. So it couldn't be Alcoholics Anonymous, ta-da! It would have to be Alcoholics Anonymous and Dr. Silkworth. So that got moved through the Roman numerals. Just for those that are like, wait, this is such an important part of the book. Why is it in the Roman numerals? Because of literary convention. What a fun and exciting note to leave the big book study off on. So over to you, Peppa, right off on literary convention. Thank you, guys.